Everyone in the territory feared the outlaw. He wept when she first said his name. The bullet was still in me when she found me. I knew it was still in me because I could feel it shift when I breathed, something wrong and heavy lodged between two ribs, moving when it should not move. I had been lying in the creek bed for what I reckoned was most of a day. The water came up cold around my boots. I wasn't in the water, not exactly. The bank had given way and I'd rolled down into the edge of it, and that's where I stayed. The horse was gone. The men who'd shot me thought I was gone too, or they'd have come back to check, and they hadn't come back. So I lay there. The sky went from blue to gray to black, and back to gray again. At some point I got cold enough that I stopped being cold, and that scared me more than the bullet had. There was a cottonwood above me, big around as a wagon wheel, and I watched its leaves in the dark for a long time. Just watched them. Waiting, I suppose, though I wouldn't have said for what. My name, if you want it, is Cord Dillard. Maybe you've heard it, maybe you haven't. In those years the name meant something in the territory, something people stepped around, something mothers used to make their children behave. Cord Dillard will get you. I'd heard that said within earshot of me more than once, said to a child, and the child would look and see me standing there and go white. That's a particular kind of loneliness that I don't know how to name. You get used to it. You tell yourself you get used to it. What it means, practically speaking. No doctor would treat me. No town would have me overnight. There was a price on my head in 2 territories, and most men who could collect it felt good enough with a rifle to try from a distance, which is what these 3 had done on the ridge above Canyon Creek, which is how I came to be lying in that creek, bed watching cottonwood leaves against a dark sky, with a bullet sitting between my ribs like a bad thought I couldn't shake. I was 38 years old. I had ridden hard since I was 17 and I was tired. That's the truth of it, not the romantic kind of tired that men sometimes dress up in better clothes than it deserves. Just tired. Bone tired, muscle tired, the kind of tired that gets into the marrow and stays. I had been riding alone for 6 years, and before that I rode with men who were mostly dead now. And the ones who weren't dead weren't the kind you called friends. And I hadn't called anyone that in longer than I could clearly remember. I thought this is probably where it ends. The creek bed, not even full in the water, just at the edge of it with wet boots and a bullet in me and the horse gone. I thought, all right. And then I heard her. She wasn't quiet about it. That surprised me later when I thought back on it. Most people moving through that country at night moved quiet, because there were reasons to move quiet. She was talking to herself or to an animal, one. A low running commentary, practical in tone. There it is, now watch that rock, easy now. I heard the mule before I saw her, the soft blow of its breath, the creak of a laden pack, and I managed to get one hand on my pistol, which I did not have the strength to actually raise, and then she came around the bend of the creek and stopped. She had a lantern, she held it up. The first thing I saw of her was the light catching on the side of her face, the angle of her cheekbone, one eye dark and steady, hair pulled back and coming loose in pieces around her ears. She was maybe 32, 33. She was not afraid. That was the strange part. She looked at me the way a person looks at a problem they are already sorting through. She said, "There's a bullet in you." Not a question. She had already seen it. I said, "You need to keep moving." She set down the lantern and came toward me. I still had my hand on the pistol. She crouched beside me and looked at where my coat was dark with blood, and she pulled it back without asking, and I didn't stop her. I don't know why I didn't stop her. Maybe because I didn't have the strength. Maybe because no one had touched me with that kind of matter-of-fact care in so long that I didn't know what to do with it. "I'm going to need more light," she said, "and you need to get out of this water. I told you to keep moving." She looked at me, not frightened, not impressed, just level. "I heard you," she said. She went back to the mule. Her name was Nora Vesper. She was a doctor's daughter out of Missouri. The doctor had come west and died of the same fever he tried to treat in others, which she told me plainly with a dry kind of grief, the way people describe losses that have had long enough to settle. She had learned what she knew at his elbow from the time she was 8 years old, and what she knew was considerable. She had a bag with her that was better equipped than most of what passed for medicine in the territory towns. She was traveling alone to a homestead settlement 3 days north where they had a need, and she had a reason to go. She did not tell me her reason that first night. She concentrated on me. Getting me up the bank took a long time. She was strong. She put her shoulder under my arm without ceremony and pushed, and I used what I had, and together we managed the slope. She put me against the cottonwood with a bedroll under me, and she built a small fire which I said was a risk, and she said that everything was a risk and she needed to see, so I closed my mouth about it. What she did to get the bullet out I will not describe in any detail because it is not the kind of thing that improves with description. I will say that I did not make a sound through most of it, which cost me a great deal, and somewhere near the end of it I did make a sound, which cost me the rest. She worked clean. She talked to me when she needed me conscious and stopped talking when I needed to be still. When it was done, she had the bullet in her hand. She held it up in the firelight for me to see, and she said, "That's out," with the same flat satisfaction a carpenter might say that's square. Then she cleaned the wound. She packed it, she wrapped it. Then she sat back on her heels and looked at me, and I looked at her, and we stayed that way for a while. "You're Cord Dillard," she said. "Did you know that before you started?" I suspected it. She began wiping her hands. "I've been in the territory 8 months. Your name comes up. And you still came over." She looked up at that. Something shifted in her face, not softness exactly, but consideration. Like she was thinking about whether to say the next thing, and decided to. "A man bleeding in a creek bed is a man bleeding in a creek bed," she said. "That's all he is. I did not die, seems worth saying plainly. For 3 days I lay against that cottonwood and she stayed, which I had not expected. I expected her to leave after the first night, after the bullet was out and I was no longer a man bleeding in a creek bed but just a man with a wanted notice against his name, a man who was trouble to be near, a man that sensible people put distance between themselves and. But she stayed. She checked the wound morning and night. She made broth from dried things in her pack. She built the fire small each night and she read by it from a book she carried in her coat pocket. And when I woke in the dark she was usually still there, still reading, or sitting with the book closed and her hands around a cup. On the second night I woke past midnight and she was asleep against the mule, which had stayed because she'd hobbled it. The fire was low. There were stars above the cottonwood, thick as river gravel. I lay there and looked at the stars and at her sleeping face in the low light, and I thought, I cannot remember the last time someone stayed. Just stayed. No transaction, no angle, no debt to call in later. Just stayed. On the third morning I woke to her moving around camp, and I was well enough to sit up without it costing me everything, and she brought me coffee and crouched beside me while I drank it. The light was still early, thin and pale through the cottonwood. I could hear the creek. She had her own cup and she watched me over the rim of it, and there was something on her face I wasn't sure what to do with. "You need another week before you ride," she said. "I can't stay here a week." "I know." She looked past me at the ridge. "There's a place, a canyon about 4 miles north, used by sheep herders in the cold months, empty now. A stone house, small, but it has a roof. I know it from my first week here. I treated a man who had been sheltering there." She brought her eyes back to me. "I could take you there, leave you supplies, come back on my way north." I said, "That's out of your way." "It's not so far out of my way." "Nora." It was the first time I had used her name. It surprised me to say it. I hadn't planned it. She was quiet for a moment, looking at me. "Cord," she said. And that was it. Just my name. She said it the way a name is supposed to be said, like it meant something, like it was the name of a man who mattered, not a threat you used to frighten children, not a reward printed on a notice, not a sound people made with a kind of satisfaction when bad news arrived. She said it like it was my name. I don't know what my face did. I looked down at the coffee. I had not cried since I was 14 years old. I was not going to cry now at 38 over a woman saying my name beside a creek in the early morning. I drank the coffee, and I did not look at her for a while, and when I did she was still watching me, steady, with that same level look she'd had when she first crouched over me in the creek bed. She didn't say anything about what had happened in my face. She just drank her coffee. We got to the canyon house that afternoon. It was what she said, small, stone, a low doorway, a hearth that smoked some. She knew where the herder had kept his wood, a store of it stacked under an overhang. She made a fire and she laid out what she could spare from her pack, and she showed me where the spring was, close enough to the house that I could reach it even moving the way I was moving. She had to go. She said it simply, and I knew it was true. The homestead to the north was waiting, and she had already stayed 3 days she hadn't planned for. She was checking the dressing one last time, her hands at my side, her head bent to the work, and I could see the part in her hair, the small hairs that came loose from it, and I thought, I need to say something. Something true. Because she was leaving and I didn't know if I would see her again, and she had done a thing for me that I did not have adequate language for. Not just the bullet, not just the fire and the broth and the 3 days, but the way she'd said my name. I said, you could have let me lie there. She tied off the bandage. She did not look up right away. Yes, she said. Most would have. Most would. She smoothed the cloth with her thumb. I'm not most. She stood. She looked at me. She put one hand against the side of my face, just rested it there, warm and flat and calm, and she looked at me for a long moment with those dark, steady eyes, and I did not move and I did not breathe, not really. She said, you're going to be all right, Cord Dillard. Not a comfort, not a thing you say to be kind, a fact she had already decided. She dropped her hand. She went to the mule. She was down the canyon and out of sight before I had taken more than 2 breaths. I stayed in the stone house for 9 days. She came back on the 7th. I heard the mule first, the same sound as the creek bed, that soft breath, the creak of the load, and I was in the doorway before she came around the canyon wall, and she looked up and saw me standing there under my own power, and something moved through her face. Relief, maybe, or something that looked like relief but was different. She rode to the house and I helped her unload, and we didn't say a lot. It was a comfortable not saying. She stayed 2 nights. We sat by the fire and she told me about the homestead, a hard young woman there raising 3 children alone with a broken arm that had set badly, and Nora had broken it again and set it right, and she told me this without drama, straightforwardly, and then she asked me things about myself, careful things, nothing that pressed. She wanted to know where I was from, original from. She wanted to know if there were people. I told her about my family, brief, because there wasn't much to tell by then, most of them gone. She listened and didn't offer the usual things people offer, the false comfort, the unnecessary brightness. She just listened. It was more than most people had ever given me, and it was less effortful than anything I could remember. On the 2nd night, late, the fire down to coals, I told her what it had been like. The years. Not to justify them, I was past that, past needing anyone to say it was all right, and it wasn't all right, some of it. But just what it had been like. Riding alone. The particular silence of a camp with 1 man in it. Eating alone for 6 years. The mothers with the children and what it cost me, hearing that. Watching every door close. She sat across from me, with her knees pulled up, and she listened to all of it. When I was done, she was quiet for a moment, watching the coals. Does it tire you, she said, the riding? Yes, I said, it tires me. She nodded, like that settled something. She came back a 3rd time in October, when the aspens had gone yellow up on the higher slopes and the mornings had a cold in them that was going to become winter. I had stayed in the canyon. I had not meant to stay, I had meant to leave, to get clear of that country before the passes closed, the way I always did, moving ahead of the season, always moving. But I stayed, and I think I knew why, even though I didn't say it. She came around the canyon wall in the afternoon light, and I was splitting wood. I heard the mule, and I looked up, and I set the axe down against the block, and I stood there watching her come. She reined in, and she looked at me for a moment from up on the mule. "You're still here," she said. "I am. I thought you might be." She got down. I took the reins. She looked at me with that level look, and she reached up and put her hand against my chest, just over where the wound had been, just rested her palm there, and she could probably feel my heart through my coat, and I let her. "I was thinking," she said, "that the homestead settlement needs someone who knows the country. Someone who can ride and knows how to handle trouble before it becomes worse trouble." "That's not what I am," I said. "What I am is trouble." "You're also someone who knows the country." She left her hand where it was. "And I'm going to be there through the winter, at the homestead." I looked at her hand on my chest. I looked at her face. "Nora. Cord." Just our names. Back and forth like that. Like they were enough. And they were two people calling each other by name in a canyon in October with the aspens yellow and the cold coming, and her hand against my heart. And I had been alone so long that the simple fact of being called by my name by someone who meant it felt like more than I had language for. I had wept the first time she said it. I don't mind saying so now. I had looked down at that coffee cup and held myself still, and I had wept quietly, not making anything of it, because a woman had said my name like it meant a man worth saying it to. I wasn't ashamed of it then, and I'm not now. A man can go long enough without a thing that when it comes he shakes a little. That's not weakness. That's just a man registering the truth of something. I put my hand over hers where it rested on my chest. She didn't move. "I am going to tell you how it went, the winter and what came after, though I won't take long about it. I rode to the homestead settlement with her. The young woman with the arm was named Claire, and she had 2 boys and a girl, and the boys were at an age where they watched me with a careful attention I recognized, because I had watched men that way at their age measuring. I didn't make a thing of it. I worked. There was fence to rebuild, and there was a root cellar that needed shoring, and there were 3 horses that needed winter readying, and I did those things, and after a week the boys had stopped watching me so carefully. There were 4 other homesteads in the settlement, and the men from them rode over in the first days to look at me. That was to be expected. I didn't ask for a welcome from them. I worked, and I kept my own counsel, and I let them make up their minds. By December, one of them had asked my help with a horse problem, and another had asked me to ride with him to check on a back section of his land where there had been trouble, and I went both times, and I did not make anything of it. Nora and I were not right away. We were not anything formal. She had her work and I had mine. We ate with Claire and the children most nights, all of us around the same table, and Nora and I talked in the evenings sometimes. And once in a while we walked out in the cold to check on the horses together, and we stayed out longer than checking on horses required. That was what it was for a while, and that was enough. I had not had enough for so long that enough felt enormous. In January there was trouble from a gang of men working the valley to the south, running off horses, burning a lined shack, the usual prelude to something worse. 2 of the settlement men came to me and said, plainly, that they knew who I was and what I could do, and they were asking. I told them what I thought the situation was and what it would take to handle it, and we handled it. No one died. That was the aim, and we made the aim. After that the settlement was different toward me. Not all of it, but enough. Men nodded to me who had not nodded before. A woman who had kept her children inside when I rode past let them out. Small things. The kind of small things that a man who has lived outside of that for long enough feels in his chest like something returning that he'd given up on. And Nora was there. She said my name the same way she'd said it the first time, every time like it was the name of a man who mattered, like there was no question about that. She was not soft about it. She didn't coddle me or go gently around the things I'd done or treat me like something that needed careful handling. She was straight with me. She had opinions and she told them to me and she expected me to tell mine back. And I did. And sometimes we disagreed and we said so. She was the most present person I had ever been around, not performing anything. Just there, looking at you with those steady eyes and saying what she thought and listening when you said what you thought. I was not accustomed to being listened to. I was not accustomed to being looked at without the other person calculating something, cost or threat or reward. She didn't calculate. She just looked. In March she asked me one morning, plainly, the way she did things, whether I was intending to stay, and I told her plainly that I was, and she nodded like she'd thought so, and then she said, "Well then." Well then. I'm not going to make more of that than it was. She said well then, and she went back to what she was doing, and I went back to what I was doing, and both of us knew what it meant, and that was that. I am a long way from that creek bed now. From those 3 men on the ridge and the bullet between my ribs and the horse gone and the water cold around my boots. Sometimes it comes back to me whole, the cold, the dark, the cottonwood leaves, the sky going black and then gray again, and I think about what I had thought lying there. All right. I had thought all right, meaning I was done, meaning I'd made my peace with the creek bed being where it ended. And then her lantern came around the bend. There are things I know now that I did not know then. One of them is that a man can ride long enough alone that he forgets what it is to be called by his own name like it means something. He gets used to the silence. He gets used to the doors closing. He tells himself he's gotten used to it, and mostly he believes it, because the believing is easier than the alternative. Another thing I know is that it takes a particular kind of woman to come around that bend. Not fearless, Nora wasn't without fear. She told me that plainly. She'd had fears about coming west, fears about the settlement, fears about plenty. But she came anyway. She came around the bend and held up the lantern and saw a man bleeding in a creek bed, and she decided he was worth the trouble before she knew anything else about him. And when she knew everything else about him, she kept deciding the same thing, again and again, which is not a small thing to do and not a thing to take lightly. A man weeps when a woman says his name, like it means a man worth saying it to. He does that once, in the early morning with his face turned down, and then he carries it forward. He earns it. He gets up from the creek bed. He rides to the canyon and then to the settlement, and he fixes the fence and shores the root cellar and winter readies the horses and handles the trouble in the valley and does it again the next time, because the name she says is his name, and he intends to be worth it. That's the whole of it. I'm sitting on the step of the house at the settlement right now, this particular morning, winter well behind us, the aspens showing the first green of spring on the upper slopes. I can hear Nora inside. She's talking with Claire about something, low and practical, the kind of voices that mean the world is going on as it should. In a while I'll go in. But right now I'm sitting here in the morning, and listening to her voice through the wall, and the aspens are going green, and there are horses in the corral. I spent a long time being what the territory was afraid of. I've been a lot of things. This is the best one.